Hello, beautiful, light-filled souls. My name is Tricia Barker, and I'm here with Debra Diamond to talk about the after effects of near-death experiences. She's a researcher, and she wrote a wonderful book called Life After Near-Death. And God, I wish this book had been around when I had my near-death experience. I can't tell you how needed this is, both by families of people who've had near-death experiences and people who've experienced them. So I read that you had a transformation in 2008 that kind of changed your life in really bizarre and wonderful and exciting ways. Could you tell me a little bit about that transformation? Because I know you worked on Wall Street as a money manager and then left, and you've done other things in your career before you became interested in working in spirituality.
Yeah, of course. So I'm happy to be here with you today and to talk about near-death experience after effects, because it's a topic that's becoming increasingly a part of the conversation, and it had not been in the past. So I'm happy to see that taking place. In terms of my background, yes, I was a money manager on Wall Street. I was a commentator on CNBC. I was a professor at Johns Hopkins University, and wore a few other hats as well. So when I was in the investment business, my boss always used to say to me, Debra, you have really good instincts. And, of course, in the money management business, nobody ever talks about being psychic. It's not part of the nomenclature. And so it just never occurred to me that it might be something else. But, he used to say you have good instincts. And I always kind of knew things when I was in the money management business. I didn't understand how I knew these things, but I did. In 2008, I decided to take an intuition development course in New York because I thought, I have pretty good intuition and it would be fun to take a class to, develop it. And so I went up for this weekend course, and there were about 25 people in the room, none of whom I knew, men and women. And we did a few exercises Saturday morning that were very low key, but I was getting everything in these exercises, and I really didn't understand how that was possible, but I wasn't too concerned because they were very low-key exercises. And then we took a break, and the teacher said, when we returned from the break, she said, now we're going to do a seance. And that was not anything that I wanted to do, and I was afraid, to be involved in that. But I figured, well, it was still Saturday morning, and this class went on through Sunday afternoon, and I'll just participate and then go on to the next exercise. Nothing's going to happen anyway. And teacher said, well, I'll put you in a meditative state, and then I'll take you out of the meditation. And if you see anything, let me know. And I thought, well, I'm not going to see anything. So, that doesn't pertain to me. We meditated, and then she took us out of the meditation, and she said, does anyone see anything? And I looked around the room, and everyone was looking at each other. And I raised my hand, and teacher said, yes, Debra, what do you see? And I said, well, I see about 50 people. I was seeing people from my family who had passed. I was seeing people who had passed who were somehow related to people, other classmates. I didn't know the classmates, and I didn't know until later that these were people.
So when you saw them, did you see them like in their spirit form, just kind of standing around in the room around people, or how did you perceive them?
I saw them, I'm not sure what you mean by spirit form, but I saw them as you would see someone in life. And they were doing things that they might enjoy doing in life. I saw a man in a football uniform jump up and catch a pass and then fall down on the field. And I described that, and there was a woman in the class who started crying, and she left the room. So I imagine that was somebody she knew. She never came back.
Oh, wow.
I saw a relative of mine, a young girl who had passed, who liked horses, and I saw her sitting on a white picket fence with a pony. So I was seeing people doing, particularly what they like to do in life, which is very common for the other side. They do whatever they're doing whatever they liked here. So,
interesting. Yeah, because, I communicate with my family members, my father who's in the afterlife. And now at this point, it's more just words, like it's just communication. It's not, when he passed, my grandparents appeared to me, but they were kind of just like a visual, and they were just informing me that they were there to take him on to the other side. So it was a out of a different experience. And when I see other people's, yeah, they do want to give you a clue. So I understand what you're saying. It's almost like they're replicating something from their life so that the person will know, that you're making connection with them. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, and it's different for everyone. Some people hear things, people see, that's why you have all the clairs, clairaudience and clairsentience and clairvoyance. And, not everybody has all of them. And some people just have one. And some people see, some people hear.
Yeah.
You can't say this is how it is and everybody's
right.
going to experience it that
But
way.
you had not experienced this before that moment, and it just opened up dramatically for you in that meditation?
Yeah, I had
Wow.
never experienced anything like that. I mean, I'd had, what I would say, precognitive information, pretty good clairsentience, claircognizance, but never, I mean, this is mediumship. What I'm talking about is mediumship, and I'd never had that.
Interesting.
So that was
Did it
not,
freak you out a little?
yeah, that was not anything I was seeking or anything that I wanted. And it took me several years to adjust to it. I was like, no, thank you. And here it was like, well, you don't have a lot of choice with this. You've got it now. So it took a couple years to incorporate it into my life, and now it's it's part of what I do, and I'm fine with it. Which just tells you, now I think I'm normal. So
exactly.
that tells you how far I've come.
So I want to talk about the book too, Life After Near Death. So did near-death experiencers help you incorporate some of these gifts, or studying what they went through? Because a lot of times they have spontaneous moments where mediumship is a part of what they're given, or other abilities. Did that help you integrate things yourself, or how did you come to the topic of looking at near-death experiences?
Well, yeah, Tricia, I was asked to read for a famous near-death experiencer in 2013 in Washington, D.C. I read for this guy. As a matter of fact, before I read for him, the person who wanted me to read for him said, "You're going to read for so-and-so." And I said, "Okay." And they said, "Well, don't you know who he is?" And I said, "No." And they said, "He's this famous near-death experiencer." And I was, that's fine. It doesn't matter to me, So I started reading for him, and I was seeing some very unusual things in the reading. He also has some unusual gifts that he came back with after his experience. And that's what got me started, because I couldn't figure out, after I did the reading and I came home that evening, I couldn't figure out what he was supposed to do with these gifts. Why did he have them? What was he supposed to do with them? What about other NDEers? Does everyone get something? And what are they supposed to do with it? And why is it happening? So I Googled NDE after effects, and I found out there'd been very little research done. There had been a little research done, but most of it focused on psychosocial aspects. In other words, 60 to 75% people get divorced. A lot of people come back and say they feel more spiritual. People say that they are now psychic. And that's all fine, but I come from a background of research, and I felt like that none of that could be substantiated. Well, the divorce, stuff could be. But when someone says to me, I feel more spiritual than I used to, there's no way to substantiate that. Or I'm more psychic than I used to be, or now I'm psychic. There's no way to measure it. And I was interested in these after effects that were demonstrable and irrefutable.
Right. So like the electromagnetic stuff, the making watches stop, and the physiological things like that.
Yeah, physiological and cognitive. So,
yeah.
And that stuff has not been explored. That interested me. I have a background, when I was on Wall Street, I spent the first 10 years as a healthcare research analyst. So, maybe it wasn't a coincidence that a psychic medium with a background in healthcare research was going to do some work on near-death experience after effects. I don't think there are a lot of psychics who are also healthcare researchers.
Probably not.
Yeah. So I was interested in these cases, cases of people who have enhanced eyesight or enhanced vision, that had been medically documented. People who had who had physicals before their NDEs, and they had their vision tested or they had their hearing tested. And then after the NDE, they had a physical, and the doctor said, wow, your vision's now perfect. Or, their hearing was tested and their hearing had changed.
What was one of the most surprising things that you found in your research when you looked and you thought, wow, I didn't expect that?
The most surprising thing was that so many people are walking around with after effects from spiritually transformative experiences, not just NDEs, but STEs as well, spiritually transformative experiences, of which NDEs are a subset. They are walking around with these things and have no idea what's going on. And, I talk to and read for many, many people who, all kinds of people, many people who have these experiences and NDEers. And, I might say to them, I remember in the book, I talked about this. Robert Bear was a case in the book. And I remember talking to him on the phone and I said, do you have electrical interference? And he said, what's that? And I said, well, do you interfere with, do electronics malfunction around you? And he said, oh my God, I thought I was going crazy. Every time I walk by the fireplace, it turns on and off. Or if I walk by the microwave, it turns on and off. There are so many people walking around with all sorts of after effects because they come back from these experiences with their energy transformed. It's altered. And that has repercussions on lots of different things, not just electrical. And people have no idea, and there's nobody they can talk to. If they go to their doctor, the doctor says, you'll get over it.
Right.
Or their family says, that didn't really happen to you.
Right.
So it's not something that's spoken about. And even if it is, there aren't that many people who can say, yes, I'm familiar with what you're talking about. The people who researched before me can't, discuss that because that wasn't part of their research. They were researching, somebody was more spiritual, so it's a different part of the research.
The electrical interference is really disturbing for me now that I'm trying to do podcasts and interviews, because if I get excited, I'm hearing something that I like, then the voice might cut out for a minute. And so I have to work with myself to rein in, my energy, because I affect my computer, I affect my phone. And people who are very rational really don't like to hear me talk about that, but I remember right after my near-death experience, I walked under streetlights and they exploded. So when I was recovering and learning to walk again, was in this great mood, and just one after another exploded. And my friend, after the third one, was like, okay, yeah, that's weird. Because when we walked to the other side of the street and the light just dimmed a little, and if we walked near it, it exploded. And so these moments, I didn't know about Kundalini awakenings or this kind of energy that I was running. I thought maybe my heart was shocked. At first I thought maybe I just have electricity
that's
in my body.
Point, because you don't have to have an NDE to be electrically sensitive. So I read for people who are electrically sensitive and never had an NDE. Some of them have had heart attacks. They've had an electrical event. Okay, so it doesn't have to be an NDE. It could be something else. There's someone I read for who told me her husband, they were trying to implant a pacemaker and they were having a lot of difficulties doing it. And the guy had never had an NDE or an ST or anything like that. But, there are lots of things that can make you electrically sensitive. I mean, it's something that NDEers experience, but it's something that other people experience as well. It's not exclusive to NDEs.
Right.
So, yeah, go ahead. But thank you. Go ahead.
I wanted to also delve into the spontaneous healing, because I read that you focused on some of that with people, and everybody knows Anita Morjani's story and her miraculous healing, but there are probably other experiences where people healed quickly. Did you find that in your research?
Well, there are people who heal quickly. And again, this seems to be pointed towards energy that's been altered. And, we are energy. Our bodies are energy. We are energy. And NDEers return from their NDEs with, I would say, a greater component of consciousness than they had prior to the NDE. And that seems to do things to their it certainly does things to their consciousness, and sometimes it can do things to their physical body as well. So yeah, there are many stories of spontaneous healing. Raj Parti, who's a case in my book, Dr. Parti, had stage 4 cancer and had 7 operations and was very, very ill. Rushed to the hospital with sepsis and was operated on, had an NDE on the operating table. And a few days after his operation, he was free of cancer. He had been addicted to pain medicines, medicine for depression, and he was clear of everything, a couple days later. He was a guy who had been a very successful anesthesiologist, and he lived in this big house in California, and I think he had a Mercedes and another sports car, and he would drive to work at 6 a.m. and cut people off on the freeway, and very intense guy. And after all of this happened, he sold his, I think, 15,000 square foot house and bought a 2,000 square foot house. He sold his cars. He got out of his medical practice. I mean, he had a complete transformation. But he also, appears to have had, a case of healing. So,
yeah, I read his book, and what amazed me too is his focus on wanting to help others. So he wanted to help others with pill addiction and with addictions, and to look for healthy ways to transform their lives. And I hope that he's able to do that. I think sometimes near-death experiencers come back and they do have to make money. They do have to do something, for this world. And we should support them in the ways where they're trying to help. Like he is trying to help a subset of population that, maybe doesn't get enough attention. There's certainly recovery groups, but the spiritual healing that can go along with recovering from addiction, that's really a beautiful piece that he's adding. It's a really important piece. But yeah, did you connect with any of his story, like on a personal level, leaving Wall Street and then focusing on a spiritual life?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Most of these people, have left behind their lives, no matter what kind of life they had previously, they left it behind. I had a very high profile life, and, occasionally I meet people like that, but I don't really think of it in those terms. I guess I share with other people that I left behind, a different life. And, the life that I focus on now is helping people and doing readings and doing research and writing and speaking. So, this is what I do. And parts of what I did, in my previous life show up in this life, because I was interested in, I wanted to use my abilities to, to maximize, I guess, my psychic and mediumistic abilities. So, if I could also do research, if I could use my abilities and combine them with some other abilities that I have, I thought that would be a good thing.
Yeah. So physical healing was part of what you found. You also said new cognitive abilities you sometimes researched, and others. So musical abilities, that was not part of my talent, like when I came back. But I did feel that my brain was different. That was one of the first things I realized when I was recovering. I was like, how do I feel different? I was like, I think differently. I'm clearer. I'm sharper. And I attributed that to being in college and having a bad diet and partying too much. And, that probably had its effect. But I felt like a veil had been lifted even within my brain after my near-death experience. And I remember tearing through books at this ridiculous speed. I was just absorbing information. Did you see people who just became more studious after their NDEs, or had different ways of relating to the world?
I think what you're describing, I think it's common after NDEs for people to read everything they can get their hands on, about different religions and different spiritual experiences, because they just are trying to find out what happened to themselves. So I think that part's common. In terms of cognitive ability, there are folks who come back with newfound musical abilities or mathematical abilities. That does happen. The thing with NDE after effects that you have to be careful about, because it's now, I noticed people are starting to talk about it.
I can hear you. I'm just going to go do something really quickly. I can hear you.
Okay. So, what you have to be careful with is that not everything is an NDE after effect. And,
Yes.
and sometimes what's going on with someone is just something that's going on with them, and maybe they should follow up with their doctor or something. Not everything is an NDE after effect. And so I hear people talking about, I have this or I have that, and it's an NDE after effect. They have to be very careful with this because if people start thinking, they hear someone talk about, a self-proclaimed after effect, and then everyone begins to think that that's an after effect, that could be dangerous.
Well, so tell me though, what advice you would give to someone who, like, in that year that I was recovering after my near-death experience, two things did happen that had never happened in my life before the near-death experience. And one was a sense of timelessness and little psychic flashes where, like, say I would know exactly what you're going to say 10 minutes from now. And then it would happen. I'm like, okay, that's weird. That it's almost as if I was outside of time by about 10 minutes. I'd know what was going to happen in whatever room I was in just in a short amount of time. And then also the out-of-body experiences, which I thought were kind of trauma-induced, since I'd have had a lot of physical trauma, that if I heard an ambulance, I might fly out of my body, or if I saw something that felt like a stretcher, like just a grocery cart, then it hit something and it reminded me of being rushed into surgery, and I just like leave my body. And so those two things I know were directly connected to the near-death experience. And how would you say, or what would you say to people who are having some really weird, moments, and they don't know how to integrate them into their lives and do something with it?
Yeah. I'm not sure that I have, I can make some kind of general statement about that because everyone is different, and everybody's, what people experience is often unique to them. So I would be hesitant to start giving, very broad answers to something like that. But I mean, I can tell you for you that the psychic, piece, that's precognitive, and, what you're describing is precognitive ability, and it's psychic, and being psychic is coming back psychic is common, with NDEers. So that's what you were experiencing. The out of body, I wouldn't really know without getting into it more. I mean, I can tell you in readings, I get into the, I get people will say, this is what's happening to me. This is what happened in my NDE. I was out of body. What happened? And without kind of looking, I don't know. I mean, my guess is as good as yours. If you read my book, that I read for each of these people because I didn't know myself, and they didn't know, what had happened to them. I could give them a questionnaire to fill out and say, check off these boxes about your NDE. But then they said to me, why did I have this out-of-body experience? Why didn't I go through a tunnel? Why did I see the light or not see the, and it wasn't anything that could be answered with a checklist. And so they were interested in having readings, and because there were questions that just couldn't be answered. So a lot of times, that was something that could be addressed in a reading, and it's not something that can always be addressed in a linear world.
Right. So one thing that I remember thinking when I realized that I had a little bit of a psychic ability, I could pick out radio songs before they came on. I'd run to the radio station and turn it on, and I knew the song was going to be on, and little things like that. I couldn't get very precise information about lottery numbers or, the things that people always criticize psychics for not knowing. And so, that was kind of funny. And so I asked for it to really just go away. I was like, could this please, God, just come to me in a dream if I need to be warned of something, or if something I need to be alerted of something. I just do not want this interference in my daily life because it didn't seem that important. But do you have any instances of people that you looked at or people that you've researched who were able to integrate it in better ways, perhaps, or make more sense of their psychic ability? Or do you have anything to say about how people always criticize it? Well, psychics never know the lottery numbers.
Well, I don't feel like my job is to try to convince anybody, if psychic ability works or not. I mean, if people believe in it, that's fine. And if they don't believe, it's not my job to try to twist anyone's arm. In terms of the lot, how people have integrated it into their life. Many people I talk to say they know things or they get messages and they're just kind of matter of fact about it because they're just used to it. It's been going on for a long time and they just accept it as part of their life. And that's it, and I think, and there's a shift going on right now. So there are more and more people that this is happening to. They're not necessarily NDEers. It's just people in general. There's a shift going on. And I find that there are people coming to me who wouldn't have ever been to a psychic 10 years ago. People from the State Department or USAID or NIH, scientists. And they say, can I tell you something? Can I tell you? So, it's not the kind of thing they're going to talk about at work. But there's some kind of shift going on. And as I said, they're not necessarily people who had NDEs, but they're getting messages. Lots of people are getting messages now. They're opening up. And some people, when it first happens, are afraid of it. And some people just learn to accept it. I read for a woman once who was a successful CEO of a company she had built. And she was a very grounded, conservative person. Very successful. And, when I was reading for her, I noticed that she would get a lot of messages, and I asked her about it, and she said, oh, I've been doing that for 20 years. That's how I built my business. So she was just very acceptant. And, I think part of it depends on, it's individual to each person. Some people are like, no, like I was, with the mediumship, no thanks, don't want it. And other people are like, okay, I can maybe deal with this, or maybe I can even use it. So it's, the whole spectrum.
So is there a link between a person's predisposition for a near-death experience? Let me pause this for a minute. My connection is unstable. So my question was, do you think near-death experiences just happen to people of all walks of life, or is there a certain predisposition that a person has to a near-death experience?
Yeah, that's a good question, Tricia. So, they do happen to all sorts of people. Near-death experiences don't discriminate. So it's men, women, old, young, children. It's all over the world. It's not just people in the U.S. It happens everywhere. I found that in my research, and I talk about it in my book, is that, many of these people lived a life where they felt their lives were referenced by darkness. They had traumatic experiences, perhaps abuse, perhaps, some other sort of trauma. Many of them felt out of step. Now, I know many people say, well, wait a second, I feel out of step. Everybody feels out of step. But, it seemed to be something common that, when I would talk to these people, one of the first things they always said was, I always felt different. And then they would describe their lives, and there would often be periods of 10 or 15 years or even longer where bad things were happening to them. One thing after another, it was sort of like being in a boxing ring where you're getting beat up and you get up for the next round and then you get beat up again. So that seemed to be a very common theme with a lot of these people. Something else that was common was many people seem to ask for these experiences. Now, you can't just ask for an NDE. You can't walk around saying, can I have an NDE? And the universe says, sure, 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. But there seemed to be a link, and I notice this also with people that I read for, where they spend a lot of time thinking about what would it be like to be out there? What would it be like to be in the universe? What would it, I'd like to experience this, and they're the people who read lots of science fiction, from the time they're very young. And there seems to be some aspect of intention woven into this, but I can't say that for sure. I mean, that's only something I would speculate about based on people that I've talked to, but I can't answer it 100%.
Interesting. Yeah, because there are the atheists like Howard Storm, who I interviewed, who I think had no curiosity and no belief about the afterlife. And then I was agnostic, but I did have that wish. I desperately hoped that there was something more. I just thought there wasn't. And so, yeah, there was a longing. And the day of my near-death experience, I had this deep longing to change my life in a dramatic way. And this race that I was going to run was my symbol of it. I had no idea that it was going to be the near-death experience that changed my life. But for some reason, I saw this bright sun, this bright sunlight, and like, this is my future. This is the way my life changes and where it changes as this race. And so it is, I guess there is this form of intention. And I can relate to, of course, the abuse and the trauma and, leading up to that moment, and a sense of hopelessness really before the near-death experience, not knowing why we're here and why we suffer, and, all the connections that we can have. How interesting. Now, then you also, maybe you can weigh in on this. People tend to create near-death experiences in different ways, like their consciousness opens up in different ways. So some people seem to judge themselves much harder in the life review, or they feel that God is judging them in their life review, and they feel very beat up. I wasn't very beat up in my life review. I had a few things to work on, and I was just shown how to be different. Do you think that there's a role of manifestation in the mind while someone's having a near-death experience?
Yeah, that's a good question too. So each of these near-death experiences appear to be customized. They're very individualized for each person. Everyone gets what they need to get. And some people have life reviews and some people don't have life reviews. And what I found was in some cases, they didn't have a life review because there was no one to give them a life review. The life review is a teaching lesson. And for many people, it's administered by someone who they respected or was, they were close to, or, they needed to get the message from a particular person. I mean, if you just got it from some random person you never met before, it probably wouldn't mean that much. But for some people, they didn't have anybody to, there was never anybody in their life like that. Either the parents were not involved, or there was no grandparent or no teacher they were close to, or anything like that. So a lot of these people never had life reviews. But the near-death experience, what happens to each person is very individual and very customized. And there's, it's just not, one size fits all. I don't know how it happens. I don't know how our consciousness knows exactly where to go, but it does. And, there are also people who have near-death experiences. I mean, we're very caught up, this whole NDE thing is very caught up in people's anecdotes about what happened to them. And I think that's valid. But I mean, I felt when I wrote my book and when I did research, there's a lot more to this experience than, I went through the tunnel and I saw the light. There's more. Why is this happening to people? What are they supposed to take from it? And, and what about the after effects? What do all those mean? Because that's what people are left with afterwards. And there are literally millions and millions of people who've had near-death experiences, and there are many stories of, they all have personal stories. And but why is this happening? And that was something that I was very interested in pursuing, because that's a big question. And, what I found.
Did you come up with an answer?
Well, I came up with an answer. I don't know if it's the answer, but I came up with an answer in my research and in the book. And, I talk a lot about this in the book. Most of these people come back with a desire to be of service. And their energy, as I mentioned before, is altered. I did readings for all these people, and I told them, you could all ask questions in the readings. I had a long list of questions, but, you all can ask questions too. They all had the same question. What's my mission? They always used the word mission too. They never said, like, should I go back to school or should I get a new job? It was always, what's my mission? They all came back as missionaries for the light. They all came back as batteries to light the world, to provide some sort of service, to elevate the energy, I think. And so then the question becomes, what does the universe know that this is happening? And I don't know the answer to that, but it's a very big question. And whatever it is that seems to be taking place, it's accelerating.
Yes, I know this. I noticed this in the world. I felt very lucky that God gave me a specific mission. like I felt like, wow, thank you. Okay. I may mess up in the rest of my life, but I will always be, a teacher and a professor. And that's where I'm meant to spread the light. And it was wonderful. And I saw other near-death experiencers really struggle and go, okay, well, I'm providing for my family. I don't know if this is really my mission. I'm longing to do something else. Or, I hear them now even talk about, what's my mission? How do I find that? And I try to translate it exactly the way you were talking about, like, your mission is to help people who are suffering deeply. So if you have some connection in some way that you suffered, maybe before your near-death experience, then you help those people. Like, I helped so many students who had an abusive mom, or so many students who had, a problem with drugs and alcohol, or so many students who just had experienced something that I had. So I always tell people, look in yourself at what you've overcome and where can you be of most benefit, and spread light. And maybe it isn't even in your career. Maybe it's just in your life, and who you interact with, that is our mission. That is part of raising the consciousness. But do you see them struggling with the mission part?
Yes, it's a big struggle. And I mean, I will just respectfully disagree with you that it's tied to, that their mission is tied to something in their life before. It may be, it may not be. So I've seen many people who come back, well, they come back and they're trying to figure out what their mission is, and many of them never figure it out.
Yeah.
Because it's a great idea to come back as a missionary for the light, but the truth is that we live here on Earth, and there are some things that you just can't translate to Earth. So, if you do Reiki, that's something that you can do here on Earth, energy work, right? But not everything is energy, not everything is, can be translated in that way. There are many people, so there was a person in my book, and she had a big career as a documentary film producer before her near-death experience. And following her near-death experience, she became a harp thanatologist. So she plays harp at the bedside of, hospice patients. This is not related to any, to her previous career. And she just kind of stumbled on it by accident. Well, by accident. I think the universe led her to it. But, there's another case in the book, a similar case of somebody who had a pretty dark life and ended up going into music, who had no experience with music ever. So, and there's a compulsion to do these new skills. There's a guy in the book, Dan Rima, who became an artist, and he was, I believe, a geologist before his NDE. And he would say to me after his NDE, he would have these compulsions to make this art, and they would go on for like 5 months. He would work on 3 or 4 things at the same time, and he was just driven to produce this work. And it was energy. The energy was coming in, and he had to release it. And, eventually he would release it, and then the cycle would start all over again. But, he would say to me, I'm a scientist. I'm not an artist, So yeah. These things just seem to, for some people, they just seem to transpire. And for others, they wish something would transpire. They wish they could find this mission. Not everybody finds it. And, I don't know, there's no way you can just say, tomorrow I'm going to find my mission. It doesn't, it doesn't really work like that.
Yeah. And I think I just encourage, when I come across near-death experiencers, to keep looking and keep going to classes and opening up in spiritual groups, because they never know where they will get that link and find what they want. And I appreciate your answer. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There are spontaneous talents, or just people are led in new and beautiful ways. I was talking, I think, more from like a heart level, like any pain that you may have suffered or anyone may have suffered, they can transform maybe in a new way, through a new talent or through a new experience. But still, I think we come back and we still have our own healing to do as near-death experiencers. And I've found that part of that healing is through helping other people heal. So, as I was working with kids who had gone through child abuse and was protecting them, then I was doing what other teachers didn't do for me, or what other, institutions didn't do for me. And I think that piece was really important. And so I think there's maybe a beautiful coming together of loose ends, when life works out in that way. And so that might be part of it. But yeah, how do you just spread light, like in general, through books, through talks, through, interacting with people? I mean, through energy work, there's numerous ways to spread light. Music.
Yeah. I mean, well, music is vibration, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's lots of activities that are vibrational activities, but, and for some people that works, for some people that's a way to, do the work, but it's not, not for everybody. As I said, I see many people who are still seeking this mission, and you hear about a lot of NDEers who, they've had this profound experience, and then, they go off, sometimes they can't get a job, because their old job doesn't work for them anymore, and they go from place to place looking for the answer, and sometimes they don't find the answer. So it's not all, you probably have had this experience. People say to me, geez, I wish I could have an NDE. That would just solve everything. And
no!
It's not a panacea,
Yeah.
It presents you with, now you have other issues to deal with.
I was actually going to ask you about that question, because you have a chapter in your book about why you don't want a near-death experience. And I have so many people on these boards who say things like, God, I want a near-death experience. I want to feel that love and that light of God. And yes, that part was amazing. And I'll never deny that being that close to God's love and having all the pain and darkness of this life washed away was incredible. And I wish everyone could feel that daily in their lives. And I wish I could feel it at that powerful level, every day back in form. But no, it's very confusing. A near-death experience takes you from one point in life to this dramatically different point, and you can't get back to being yourself. You can't ever go back. You can try, and you can't. And that's one of the hardest parts. There's lots of difficult parts. What did you come to a conclusion about in that chapter?
Well, so people who are high functioning to begin with seem to have an easier time of it. I mean, there are people who, if you look at their backgrounds, and they were able to move through crises, or, continue to try to create a path for themselves in their lives. They, would often, now they had new challenges, but they would keep going. Some people who had difficulties to begin with, it's not that they came back and they were now perfect. Many of them continue to have challenges. Not all of them, but some of them. So it's, you can't say that there's not one answer, unfortunately, for all this. I mean, we're all different. We're all individuals. We all have different experiences. Everyone has a different NDE. Everyone has different life experiences. So, I wish I could say, do this, do that, and do that, and then, it's all going to work out great. And we're all meant to have different lessons, right? So, it's sort of it's a living thing, and you have to hope with universal guidance that it's all going to, you're on your path and it'll all work out. I mean, I do believe, I don't believe that you can give yourself an NDE. I do believe that it plays a role. Like you said, the day that this happened to you, is there something more? I mean, that's kind of common. People say that there must be something more, boom, and then they get their experience. But that wasn't they're probably thinking, there are probably things that happened before that, right? But I do believe that the universe plays the most significant role in all of this. You can't bring on your own NDE. I believe that the universe sort of targets people. And this may sound really crazy, but I feel like they, and don't ask me who they are, but whoever they are, kind of look down at all of us and is watching everyone and saying, that person over there, they may be a candidate. And they're usually people who are broken in some way. And who's a better candidate to be a missionary for the light than somebody who's been on the dark side, right? They're ready to embrace the light. They're ready, And, when I have talked to all these people, and I've talked to thousands of NDEers at this point, between the speaking that I do and the readings and people I hear from, because of my book and whatnot, I've talked to so many people. And, and you hear the same stories over and over again, these very similar stories of what happened to them in their past. And there's always this, dark background that gets interrupted at just an exquisite moment. And, that's all that's the only way I could define it. It's just all of a sudden, this could go on for years and years that you're kind of wandering in the darkness and wondering how much longer is this going to go on and why is this happening to me? And then all of a sudden you have this freak accident where you're actually fine. You should have died, but you're actually fine. And, why did it happen at that exact moment? Why? And, someone like me, you start listening to these stories over and over and over again, and you realize, wait a second, this is now the, 2000th person who's told me they were going along in their life and this very weird thing happened, this weird accident happened. And, it seems almost as if the universe lets you go on for a long time to have these experiences, to let them accumulate until you finally say, enough. And then the universe says, okay, you got the lesson? Now we're going to flip the switch.
And you bring up a good point of people who are kind of broken or have a lot of darkness in their lives. When they are introduced to that light, it's so healing and it's so amazing in that near-death experience, and they're less judgmental. So when I came back into the teaching field at junior high and high school levels, so many teachers were judgmental of this student or that student for wearing a concert t-shirt or doing that. And I was like, I looked into their souls and I was like, what's going on with this kid? How can I help? What does this person need? And I think that that judgment prevents a lot of people from reaching out to others and really helping them. And so I think, the light can use people who are broken or who have experienced darkness and in profound ways, because it's a big switch and it's an interesting story. It makes for life. It makes for a good life story in a sense, to go from one extreme to another.
Right. And then there are also people who've had multiple near-death experiences because they don't get it, the lesson, the first time around. So it's almost like the universe says, okay, we're giving you this lesson. Now you're working for us. And they don't get it, so they're like, I don't really want to work for you. I think I'll just go do this other thing.
But do you think, though, that, and I wonder, I've never had a surgery since my near-death experience, which occurred during surgery, back surgery. Do you think, though, that I'm a little bit loosened from my body and, I can leave it in lucid dreams and that kind of thing. Do you think, though, that once near-death experiencers have had a near-death experience, they're just going to have one the next time they go into surgery? Because I've wondered about that, not necessarily.
No.
Okay.
I think, again, I think this is driven by the universe. I don't think it's sort of like, at 10 o'clock on Thursday, I'm having surgery. Oh, I guess at 10:05, I'll have my near-death experience.
Well, I'll let you know, though, if I ever have to have surgery, if I observe it.
It doesn't work that way. I can just tell you it doesn't seem to work that way. There are many people who have one near-death experience and that's all they have. There are others who have multiple. Not everyone occurs in surgery, there's lots of ways that they can occur. You could be sitting on your couch and have something,
And then the people who get really critical about looking at near-death experiences. So I've interviewed someone who wasn't technically dead. He didn't go into the hospital or, he laid down in his bed and had a full near-death experience. Then there are also, usually people classify those as out-of-body experiences, but what do you think is the dividing line? Can someone just lay in bed, not go into the hospital and have a near-death experience?
So the answer to that, Tricia, is that the near-death experience is not defined by, this checklist of, you must have surgery or be in an automobile accident or, something like that, drowning. The bottom line is that according to Assist, I don't know, Assist, the definition of a near-death experience is if you come back transformed, unable to go back to your previous life, right? So it's not whether you saw a light. It's not whether you saw a tunnel. There are many people who had experiences and didn't experience any of that. And there are people who've had experiences and experienced, can check off all the boxes. But it's really whether you come back transformed, unable to go back to your previous life. So I hear from many people who say, I went to a meeting once and they had a speaker who said, she'd had multiple near-death experiences. And each one that she talked about was that she'd had an out-of-body experience. That was it. I took this antihistamine and I had an out-of-body experience. That was my first near-death experience. And then I was, reading a book and I had an out-of-body experience. That was my second near-death experience. Well, that doesn't mean she had near-death experience. She had an out-of-body experience. Right. Doesn't necessarily mean she had a near-death experience. So, there's a lot of confusion about what is a near-death experience. And I really blame the media for this because, the media is all about making something dramatic and visual. It's a visual. Movies are visual. And, they are perfect for dramatizing all of this. So, they can have a shot of heaven. They can have shots of a tunnel and, brilliant white light and God and all sorts. There's a lot they can do, to make it look really super dramatic. And unfortunately, there's another downside to that. Many of the near-death experiences I've talked to have said, I didn't see a light. Maybe my experience wasn't valid. And I'm like, well, wait a second. You don't have to see a light. You don't have to, they think that because all these things have been sensationalized, that's the definition of a near-death experience. And it's not. Not everybody has, experiences all of that. So I really believe it's whether you come back transformed. Because remember, let's go back to what I said earlier. These people are all being used as missionaries for the light. So does that mean you have to go through a tunnel? No. Does that mean you have to have had a life review? No. It means, though, that you have to come back transformed, full of light, so you can go do this work. And that can happen in a variety of ways. It could happen by experiencing, all the elements. It could happen by experiencing none of the elements. So, now I see, these posts online about people saying you must have died. You have to die to have a near-death experience. Not true. So you don't have to clinically die. So there's a lot of misinformation around, and unfortunately, it's other NDEers telling other, there are NDEers putting out information, and then there are also people who are not NDEers who are putting out information. So there's, all of this is still murky. I think there's a lot of information floating around.
I think it's a little bit profound, though, for those of us who did clinically die and saw the monitor flatline and did have, this clear sense that our physical body was dead in this medical setting, that gives us validity that maybe other people don't have if they're laying on their bed or on their couch. And you're right, though, the important thing is, are you changed? Are you this missionary for the light? Did your experience blow your mind open in a way that you can never be the same person again? I think maybe I'm lucky to have a verifiable fact and to have, these moments that are verified, because the first thing that people usually do is just discredit it, and I'm not even interested in that. I'm so certain of my near-death experience that I'm like, who even cares? If you don't believe it, that I just know that there's a reality stronger than this reality, more vital and more expansive and more interesting than this particular reality that we're looking at. But yeah, you bring up great points. So to the people who have been on their couches and don't have, or in a bathtub, or, I've heard so many different locations, they have had a near-death experience if they cannot go back to who they were before.
Think back on when Raymond Moody coined the term near-death experience. He was trying to take something that had never been defined before and put a framework around it. And he called it near-death experience. Now, what's happened because of that is people perseverate on, death. He said near-death experience, so therefore you have to have been dead. And there's been a lot of work done since then, and they're still doing work. We're still doing work to try to understand this phenomenon. So, this is not to say that, if you flatlined, that's one experience. There are people who flatline who also didn't have a near-death experience. I mean, it's, there's no one size fits all. So it's, you really have to listen to each person's, this is what I found. You listen to each person's experience, and find out what was involved, and then talk to them about, what's going on with them now. Now, I also see when I talk to people, when I read for people, I'm able to see auras and chakras and all of that. And I also will see on their aura, usually if they've had some sort of traumatic experience. I can see if they've had a traumatic experience, and I can also see if they have a quality of white light that's embedded in them. It's usually in their heart chakra or in their crown chakra, something it's coming in, and the quality of that white light is different than what you would get from just like meditating every day, right? It's this, they have in them, and some of them have like an aura that supersedes they have an earth aura that's shows everything that's happened to them in their life. And, and it's like your fingerprint, it's embedded on you. But then a lot of them also have another aura that supersedes that's just filled with brilliant white light, and it's permanent. And it's almost like a shield from the universe that they came back with.
Interesting. That's really fascinating, because I've had Reiki workers tell me that I have an aura that sets at about 8 feet.
I can often tell when I'm reading.
And I think we cut out for just a minute.
Well, I can often tell when I'm reading for someone, even when I start off a reading, if I see that, I know I know immediately that they've had some sort of experience, because not everybody has that aura. Some do, but when they show up and they've got this white, if you can imagine this just brilliant white light all around them, superseding, like a earth aura. My next question is, what happened to you? When you were 8 years old, did you drown? And they're like, oh my God. So that's kind of what they never put the pieces together. Yeah. So they come back with that, and that's just something that I'm able to see, that, I'm not normal. So, I see chakras, and I see auras, and I see, and I'm able to see this particular white light. I also see it, as I said, in their heart chakras. I'll see this like powerful white light in some people's heart chakras. And that, as somebody who hasn't had that experience, it's not there.
Interesting. Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. And I didn't understand, why someone would say, why does your aura have to be out here? I tried to bring it in, but it wants to stay right at 8 feet, which is a big, field of space. But I think that we must be physiologically changed. And for those people who can see, on an energetic level, how we've changed, that's really amazing. So are there any...
We are changed, our consciousness has changed, and there's just no way to really measure that. That's the thing. But it has an impact on lots of things. We come back top heavy, with consciousness. And then we have to try to figure out how to navigate this world, because we're in a 3D, material world, and we're coming back now, a little altered. So anyway, there's a lot to think about. And
my last question to you will be, are you hopeful as you see this awakening process happening for many people, and maybe as you do readings for younger people, are you hopeful about the world and the changes, or do you feel like there's still so much that we light workers are battling?
Yeah, I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I do see a big shift going on, and I do see a lot of people who want to do things to help. So I think that's a good thing. That can't be anything but a good thing, right? But other than that, my guess is as good as yours.
Yeah, but that's amazing. Well, we cut out a couple of times, which I'm hoping the recording is fine and we can post this later today. But thank you so much for talking with me. And it's really lovely. And for those of you that haven't read your book, Life After Near Death, I think it would be a great book for near-death experiencers and people who are just interested in the topic. And for my subscribers, please subscribe if you haven't, and hit like to this video. I'd like to bring more recordings, but may you be blessed.